Hi class, in this video I am going to go over summarizing, and I'm particularly going to address chapter 2, which is called The Art of Summarizing, and then I'm also going to go over the summarizing and response module in our course. So the first thing we want to do is we want to obviously go to the chapter. Now I am showing you this through the ebook because obviously I'm recording it through the screen, but obviously you can read the chapter in your textbook if you bought it in physical form, or you can read it through the ebook. And in case you're wondering where you should go to access your ebook and activate your access card, in case you haven't done so, it is digital.wwnorton.com/theysay4. So that's where you can go and you can go ahead and activate your access code and get access to the ebook as well as to the Little Seagull Handbook. So let's go ahead and get started. And we are going, like I said, we're going to discuss chapter 2, which is the art of summarizing. Now, when it comes to summarizing, it's actually something that is a little bit more complicated than a lot of people think. And essentially the reason why it is so complicated is because you are trying to explain what somebody else said in a condensed version. So essentially what you are doing when you are summarizing something is you are giving us the main points of that person's article or conversation or whatever it might be. Because you can summarize pretty much anything. If somebody asks you, did you watch the movie? And you say yes, and they ask you what happened, they're asking you to essentially summarize the movie because they didn't watch it. So that doesn't mean that you're going to tell them every single thing that happened in the 2-hour-long movie. You're only going to give them the main idea, the main points, the most important parts of the movie that are relevant to the overall message of the movie. So let's go ahead and get started with chapter 2. Now when it comes to the textbook, it does tell you how they are using the word summarizing. Here it says we're using the word summarizing to refer to any information from others that you present in your own words, including that which you paraphrase. So when it comes to summarizing, they're not talking about quoting. Quoting is not summarizing. Quoting is basically copying the word or the article word for word and putting quotation marks on it. What they mean here is that you're putting it into your own words or paraphrasing. Paraphrasing actually means the same thing. It means putting into your own words. And one of the things that I wanted to point out about the ebook, if you have it, is that you can actually take notes. So for example, if I want to highlight this, I can go ahead and highlight it in whatever color I want. And then I can also go ahead and right click or highlight it again, and I can go ahead and write notes. So for example, for this specific passage that I highlighted, I can go ahead and make a note to myself and say, do not quote in summaries. And like I said, basically what you want to do in a summary is you want to go ahead and put it into your own words. And you want to use your own words that you would typically use. You don't want to use words from the book or from the article that you are summarizing, because then it becomes what we call patch writing, which is a form of plagiarism. So you don't want to use too many words that closely resemble the original text. Now, I think that when I make notes here, I think that you might be able to see this whenever you open up the ebook. I am not too sure, but just keep that in mind in case you open the textbook, the ebook, and you see that this is highlighted. It's probably because I highlighted it myself. So, moving on. Something else that you want to remember is that when it comes to summarizing, you really have to focus on what the author is saying, but also what your interpretation of that article or text is. And what we mean by interpretation is we mean, how do you perceive it? What do you think it means? Those are interpretation. However, as someone who's taught literature before, students always ask me, well, is there a wrong way to interpret things? And the answer is no. However, if you have a certain interpretation and you cannot find anything in the text to support that interpretation, then it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that you are probably not on the right track. So keep that in mind, that your interpretation has to be supported with examples from the text. So basically, you cannot come up with an interpretation where nothing in the text supports it, because then that means that your interpretation is not relevant to what you just read. An interpretation should be supported by examples, quotes from the text, all of those things. So according to your textbook, you should find a good balance between what the author is saying and between what your interpretation is. Now, something to keep in mind is something else that the book mentions, is that you have to remain true to what the author is saying. So you don't ever want to, again, have an interpretation that contradicts what the author is saying. So you want to make sure that you don't make up any information, or you don't make claims that are completely out of left field and have nothing to do with what you just read, because then that means that you're not being true to the author. Which brings us to the second part, which says, on the one hand, put yourself in their shoes. So basically what the book is saying in this case is that you really have to put yourself in the writer's shoes, and you have to think about, okay, what is his or her main point? How are they supporting this main point, right? So like, for example, if the article is saying we should censor the internet, well, okay, why does the author feel this way? What is their motivation behind it, right? And in the introduction, they talk about, the introduction of the textbook, they talk about conversation. So what conversation are you entering? Usually articles are not written on super original topics. Usually articles and books and texts, they're written about issues that are already out there and people have an opinion on them. So all of these authors are entering a conversation, whether it be about the internet, whether it be about the death penalty, whether it be about health and obesity. They're entering a conversation that's already out there, so they have something to say. So your job when you're summarizing something is to read it and then try to figure out where the author is coming from and what their motivation is and how they're supporting this claim that they are making. So basically what this means is that you do not put your opinion in the article. So you do not put your opinion in the summary. So your summary should have no personal opinion, because the summary is not about you, it's about the author and what they wrote. So essentially what you're doing in the summary is you're telling us what the article was about, or you're telling us what the movie was about, or what, the essay was about. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, you can summarize pretty much everything. However, you have to remember that a summary is not about you. The summary is about the author. So you want to make sure that you remain true to the author without putting yourself in it. Now, you do have an opportunity to put yourself in the situation or join the conversation, if you will, but that comes in the response. So in the summary, just focus on the author. What are they saying? What are the most important points they're making? And then in the response, you can go ahead and respond to them, and you can go ahead and say if you agree or disagree. But again, you want to make sure that you, as the book says, you suspend your own beliefs for a time. So I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to make a note that says, do not include Now, of course, we're only referring to the summary part. Like I mentioned, once you get to your response, you can go ahead and put your opinions in the response, but not in the summary. So basically think about it this way. There's a place and a time for your response. The summary is focusing only on the author and what they have to say. So over here, we have an example. Now this is an article that you're going to read for your second essay, which is David Zinczenko's Don't Blame the Eater. Now in this example, the writer says David Zinczenko's article, Don't Blame the Eater, is nothing more than an angry rant in which he accuses the fast food companies of an evil conspiracy to make people fat. I disagree because the companies have to make money. Now, if you keep reading, this passage right here explains how, one, the author of this passage is distorting what David Zinczenko is saying. Because all of you guys are going to read this article, Don't Blame the Eater, and when you read it, you'll realize that he's not angry. He doesn't have an angry tone, nor is he ranting. So, this right here is the writer's opinion, meaning the student who is writing this. Because David Zinczenko is not angry in the article and he does not rant. So, this person who wrote this little passage right here, they're bringing in their own preconceived notions of how they interpreted David Zinczenko. But in this case, they have nothing to support it with because David Zinczenko is not angry. And also, if you notice, right here, they begin to tell us that they disagree. However, this is not something you want to do because, well, you disagree with David Zinczenko, but you haven't given us any information about what the article is about. So essentially what's missing right here is we are missing the summary. Right here is where you should tell us the main points of the article, and then you can tell us if you disagree or disagree. Because essentially what happens is you cannot tell us, I went to see this movie, I didn't like it. You have to tell us first what happened in the movie, what made you not like it. Well, first you have to tell us what happened in the movie, and then you can tell us why you didn't like it and connect it back to those examples you gave us about the movie. So, you cannot just say, this is what his article was about, I disagree. You have to give us information about that article. You have to give us the main points before you tell us if you disagree or agree. Because think about it this way, your reader, who is your audience, might not have read that article. So you have to tell the reader what the article was about before you tell us if you agree or you disagree. So, if we keep going, moving on, here is an important tip that the book provides. It says, when a writer fails to provide enough summary or to engage in a rigorous or serious enough summary, he or she often falls prey to what we call the closest cliche syndrome, in which what gets summarized is not the view the author in question has actually expressed, but a familiar cliche that the writer makes for the author's view. So sometimes basically what happens is that people do not summarize the text sufficiently. Instead, what they do is they just go ahead and say, oh, well, it's about this. And the book gives you an example. For example, somebody who is not summarizing Letter from Birmingham Jail by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. might say, oh, it's just about we need to get along. But they're missing a very important point, which is that he is defending political protest. So if you don't summarize something sufficiently, you might end up only giving us like the basic idea of what it's about, and you might be missing a lot of important parts. So it's very important that you don't do that, because like the book says, you want to go ahead and avoid cliches. But also, you know, the text is important. The articles we read are important. So you want to make sure that you pick out the most important points from there. And, you know, I'm not saying that you have to honor the author, but you do have to sort of respect what the author is saying and make sure that you do a good enough job of highlighting the most important points. So, again, when you enter a conversation, it is extremely important that you go back to what others have said, that you study it very closely, and that you do not confuse it with what you already believe. So again, this brings us to, you do not want to mix your own opinions with what the person is saying. And I'm going to highlight this because it's important. And if we go back over here, this person right here probably was already this person right here probably had preconceived notions. That's why he misinterpreted Zinczenko's article as an angry rant. Because sometimes when we already feel a certain way, you know, we get touchy or we act defensive when somebody doesn't agree with us or when we read something that does not fit our views. So that's why this is very important, right? And it says that you read it, you summarize and go back to what those people are saying, but also you want to make sure that you do not confuse it with something you already believe. So I'm going to write a note here, and that note is going to say, actually no, that note should be over here. And that note is going to say, so avoid preconceived notions, do not bring in your own beliefs. Again, the summary is about the author, and you want to make sure that you don't mix it up with what you believe and what he believes. Again, the summary is just about the author. If you have a similar belief, you can go ahead and summarize that, or sorry, you can go ahead and respond to that in the response. Now, one of the other things that we want to keep in mind is that when you're writing a summary, you have to know where you are going. So, for example, if you know that you disagree with Zinczenko, or you know that you agree with him, you should probably try to include examples in your summary that you can go ahead and discuss later on in your response. So it's important that you know where you're going, because sometimes students summarize a passage or an article and then they don't connect it back to the response. So it's important that you kind of know what your response is going to be, and in the summary you highlight the main points that you want to respond to. Of course, these main points have to actually be important and a crucial part of the summary. You don't just want to put any single point that you want to respond to, but here we have an example. So the article about Don't Blame the Eater talks about young kids who are becoming obese at a young age, and David Zinczenko talks a little bit about who's to blame, right? So let's say you already know that you think parents are to blame for their children's health. If that's the case, here's an example of what a summary could look like to support that opinion. Now, if you notice here, they picked examples from Zinczenko's article. These examples are staying true to what he said. They are not distorting his opinion or anything like that, but they're focusing on examples that have to do with parents and fast food chain companies. Because in the response, the person is saying it is the parents and not the food chains who are responsible for their children's safety. So this person already knew where they were going in their response, which is why a lot of their examples focus on parents and food chains, because they were going to go ahead and put that here in their response. So it's always good to know where you're going, just because it helps you organize your summary a little bit better. And speaking of organization, you want to make sure that your sentences are connected when you write a summary, and the reason for that is because you want to avoid what we call list summaries. If you look at the textbook, it tells you, here's an example of a list summary. And then he says, then also he points out, and then another thing he says is, and then, if you notice, all these people right here, they're asleep, because list summaries are boring, because you're just basically saying this happened, then that happened, then he says this, after that he says this. So you want to go ahead and make sure that you connect your sentences and you make the summary flow so that it's not just listing information. Because the summary is not just about listing information. As you can see over here, we have an example of a summary. It should flow very well. It should give the reader information about what the article was about. It shouldn't make them feel like you're just listing information. It should actually make them feel like they're getting a good sense of what the article was about. So yeah, definitely avoid list summaries because they can make the reader fall asleep. So moving on, like I mentioned, make sure you connect your sentences so you can go ahead and use transitional words like furthermore, in addition, thus, therefore, words like that. But what's really great about this textbook is that you also have templates. So if you look here, it gives you templates for introducing summaries and quotations. But the book makes an important point that a lot of our authors are not just saying things or they're not just discussing things, they are urging or emphasizing. So when you write your summary, you don't want to keep saying the author says or Zinczenko says or Zinczenko discusses. You want to go ahead and vary your word choice. So something that you can do besides using the templates is you can go ahead and refer to this list and use some of these verbs. Now, this is not plagiarism because these are templates and lists that the book provides for you. So if you use any of the templates or lists from the book, you can go ahead and use them freely because, like I said, that does not count as plagiarism. So I really encourage you to maybe bookmark this. If you have the physical textbook, bookmark this. If you don't have the physical textbook and you only have the ebook, make a note of this or take a picture of it with your phone, because you definitely want to refer to this list whenever you are writing. That way you don't keep repeating yourself with like says, discusses, things like that. There's a lot of great words you can use like emphasize, contradicts, denies, things like that. So that brings us to the end of chapter 2. I hope that it was helpful because, like I said, summarizing is something that we all do. Sometimes we do it on a daily basis, like when somebody says, you know, what did you do today? You're basically summarizing your day. But it's something that you do have to learn how to do because it's not that easy, because you have to figure out, okay, what's the main point that I want to convey and what are the main details that I want to show or that I want to talk about. That's what you kind of have to figure out. So now I'm going to briefly show you the summary and response module. So if we go to our course, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and go to modules. So you can either go ahead and click here or you can go ahead and click on modules. And as you can see, you're going to have to scroll down to find the summary and response module. So here we have the summary and response module. And I also have a link on paraphrasing, quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. So I'm going to let you obviously look at this on your own, but there are some things I wanted to show you. And when it comes to writing a summary and response, which we're going to be doing a few of them in class, what you want to do is you want to have one good sized paragraph that's a summary, and then you want to have a second separate paragraph that's a response. Now obviously it doesn't have to be numbered, it doesn't have to have bullet points whenever you actually type it. You just have to have one paragraph that's your summary and one paragraph that's your response. And when you write your summary, what you want to do is your first sentence should include the title of the article, the name of the author, and the main idea of the article. And right here it gives you an example. Then the rest of the summary should focus on at least 3 paraphrased examples that support that main idea you just mentioned there. And again, here we have an example of how to paraphrase a specific quote from the article. So remember, in a summary, you don't want to quote, you want to go ahead and paraphrase. Also remember that in a summary, you don't want to put your opinion. You also don't want to put any biases, right? Like you don't want to put preconceived notions. You also don't want to distort what the author is saying. So you don't want to say the author was angry when the author really wasn't, or you don't want to say that the author hates technology when the author does not really say that. So you want to make sure that you avoid opinion, biases, distortion in your summary. Once you're done with your summary, you're going to go ahead and start a new paragraph, and that new paragraph is going to be your response. In your response, you should start off with, I agree, or if you disagree with the main idea. So right here, you're focusing on whether or not you agree or disagree with the main idea that you put up over here. So if you agree, tell us why. If you disagree, tell us why. And then in the body of your response, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to give us examples that show why you agree or disagree. So when it comes to the response, you want to make sure that you provide a lot of personal examples, personal observations. So it doesn't have to be something that happened to you. It could be something that you've observed in the world or in your classes or in school or in your neighborhood. It just has to be, like I said, personal observations or personal examples in the response. Next, I do have a summary outline, and it's pretty straightforward because, like I said, the summary is one paragraph and the response is another paragraph. So if you think about it, what you want is you want the first sentence that includes the author, title of article, and main point. What I mean by publishing information is sometimes you should put the title of the newspaper. But after you've done that, all you need to do is put like 3 supporting details. Now, obviously, this seems like, oh, this is only 3 sentences, but that's not always the case. As you can see, you have to put the important detail, and then you have to paraphrase an example from the article, and then you kind of have to explain what it means in a way. So you're not explaining it in your own opinion, but you're kind of interpreting it into what the author means, right? So like, for example, if we go back to this right here, according to this, the article Drugs and War, Justin Kleist argues that America is losing the war on drugs. And then over here, I'm going to include this example, but I'm going to paraphrase it into these words. So I'm going to say, according to Kleist, U.S. law enforcement agencies cannot stop illegal drugs from entering our country. So I need to kind of interpret that. So what I could go ahead and say, because they can't stop illegal drugs from entering, that's why Kleist believes that they are failing, or they are losing the war on drugs. So as you can see, I'm following up on it, I'm explaining it, but I am still staying true to what he's saying. I'm not changing his words around. I'm not adding my own opinion. I'm just simply saying that this is why he believes they're losing the war on drugs, because they can't stop illegal drugs from being shipped or entering our borders. So again, there's a way of explaining it and interpreting it without putting yourself into it, which is something that you want to avoid in your summary. Remember, the summary is just about the author. So again, there's the outline, and then over here we have some information on paraphrasing, and it talks about effective paraphrasing. So it's definitely something that you can go ahead and read if you're having trouble with that. And then if we keep going, here are some paraphrase exercises that you can try on your own. And here's a summary checklist that I think is very helpful. So whenever you are done with your summary, go ahead and go over this checklist and try to make sure that your summary achieves all of these things, because basically this checklist lists everything that a summary should include and should not include, like quotations and biases and things like that. So this concludes our lecture on chapter 2 as well as on the summary and response module. I know that I did not go over the entire module, but like I said, I think that you guys can go over that on your own, because I don't want to make this video any longer than it has to be. But something else that I included there is the annotating strategies in reading right. So when it comes to summaries, it is very important that you read the text you are summarizing. I do not think that you can summarize something without reading it. But you don't just want to read it, you want to go ahead and make sure that you take notes. And I know that later on we're going to do an exercise on taking notes, but you can go ahead and read these now if you want to kind of get practice. So this concludes our video. If you have any questions, please let me know. We are going to be doing a summary and response, so if you have any questions about that when you get started with that, please let me know.